Right, this is the last part of the B4 topic, and this is one of the sections that I really think you will probably have a 6-mark question based on it, and it's looking at farming techniques. Now the first one you need to think about is intensive farming. Okay, and intensive farming is all about producing as much yield as possible in the shortest amount of time. And this is because farmers, obviously, they're in a business, they're trying to make money, and also they are trying to ensure there's enough food for the food chain. Now, if we looked at intensive farming, some examples are, if you think about chickens, if chickens are all put in little cages all next to each other where they can hardly move around, it means they are less likely to use up energy with movement, and more likely to put the energy into laying eggs. And you usually find a typical chicken can lay 300 eggs, whereas one that's allowed to roam around organically probably lays about 30. So you can see it means that they are just an egg laying factory, if you like. Also, if you think about livestock like pigs, for instance, when pigs are born, they are basically put into a sort of grid cage, and they just are not allowed to go anywhere. They stay there for their whole lives so that they don't move around very much, so that they can build up mass as quickly as possible. They're injected with antibiotics to make sure they don't get diseases. They have to excrete all the feces where they stand, and it just goes through into a grid. And it means that they can, like I said, gain mass quickly, and then they can be sent off to the abattoir to go to slaughter. Now, with intensive farming, we're also looking at crops and planting crops, and if we weren't using chemicals or intensive farming methods, then a farmer would probably have some kind of crop rotation, where if he got 4 fields, he'd use 3 of them one year and leave one alone so the nutrients could build up, and then the next year he'd swap it round so he left another field, and so on. But intensive farming isn't about that. Intensive farming would be about using all 4 fields every single year and spraying on loads of fertilisers and pesticides and insecticides and herbicides. And so we do say that this can cause a problem, because if you're spraying all these chemicals all the time, then those will accumulate in a food chain and can end up harming other organisms. And this is what we're talking about here. So herbicides and pesticides reduce the amount of weeds and pests, and therefore the energy that is taken by competing plants and pests, which can cause problems. The pesticides can flow into the rivers, where they can be absorbed by the algae. The algae is eaten by the small aquatic organisms, which in turn are eaten by larger organisms. The pesticide increase in concentration along the food chain because the organisms cannot excrete the chemical, and this is called persistence, and means that virtually all the pesticide is passed on to the next trophic level. There was a big problem with this. For instance, in one example, we had something called dioxins washed into a lake, and they were absorbed in small amounts by microbes called phytoplankton. The phytoplankton were eaten by something called zooplankton, and these dioxins, which do not break down in their bodies, so they then eat a large number of the phytoplankton. So the concentration builds up. Now this problem means that the next layer, the next trophic level in the food chain, and we've got a little fish called a rainbow smelt, it meant that their concentration went up by 400 times when they ate the zooplankton. So then when you've got a large trout that eats the rainbow smelt, their concentration went up by 2,000 times because they were eating all the rainbow smelt that had got the poisons in. And then if you get to the top level, you've got herring gulls, which are a little bit like seagulls, and when they eat the lake trout, their concentration went up by 50,000, meaning that a lot of them were killed off. And this is a problem because our top sort of predators or carnivores are being killed off because of the build-up of chemicals. So if we look on the other side, then we do have organic farming, where there's no chemicals used whatsoever, and animals are allowed to roam around in the fields, and plants can just grow without any pesticides. But there is a big problem there as well, because it means that it's very much more labour intensive. You have to have people actually going out and digging the weeds out, and you have to have people feeding the crops and things like that. So organic farming also can help with growing nitrogen fixing crops such as peas or clover to trap the nitrogen in the soil. So that is a good use of organic farming. Like I said, rotating crops is another one. No chemical pesticides. Varying your seed planting times as well to discourage pests is another one. Now some people do say that organically bred meat and eggs, for instance, do actually taste better, but because it's so labour intensive, it means that they are going to cost more as well. So here's some advantages and disadvantages, and these are the sorts of things you really should know, because like I said, a 6-mark question may ask you to compare intensive farming to organic farming. So organic farming advantages: the food crops and the environment are not contaminated, soil fertility is maintained, biodiversity in the local environment is promoted, so that there's lots and lots of different species of organisms that can live together because they haven't been killed by chemicals, and livestock have space to roam around. Disadvantages: organic fertiliser takes time to rot and doesn't supply a specific balance of minerals, and we're talking about manure and things like that there. Weeds have to be removed by hand. Organic farming is less efficient, and free roaming livestock use more energy and lose more body heat, so they don't gain as much mass. You may have heard of hydroponics. Okay, now basically plants don't need soil in order to grow. What they do need is they need the water, and they need the minerals that can be found in soil. So hydroponics, if you look at the word hydro is to do with water, ponics, it just means growing plants with water, and you just add minerals to it. Now this is used a lot for growing lettuces and tomatoes and strawberries in an artificial environment, because you can control the mineral levels. But again, the problem there is that it's very much labour intensive. You have to have a glass house for them to grow in, because you are controlling the conditions, and this can be good where you've got poor soil. So again, advantages and disadvantages. Advantages: and mineral levels added to the solution can be controlled, reduced risk of plants becoming diseased. Disadvantages: the plants need to be supported because they've got no anchorage for the roots. Expensive fertilisers are compulsory because you have to have the minerals. Now, biological control. Now this, in theory, sounds brilliant, because what you're doing here with biological control, you are using a natural predator to get rid of a pest. For instance, if you're, let's just say you're a rose grower and you grow lots of roses that you sell to Tesco so that they can sell them, and you get an infestation of green flies. Now those green flies are just going to destroy your crops, destroy your roses. So what you can do is you can, and I'm sure you can order these off the internet, you can order a colony of ladybirds, because ladybirds eat green fly, and you can release the ladybirds into your growing area, and they will just go around, eat all the green fly, and everything will be fine. Now there are disadvantages to this, and there was a big problem in Australia where they had where they grow sugar cane. They had this thing called the sugar cane beetle, and this beetle was going around eating all the sugar cane crops, causing absolute devastation. So the Australians realised that there was something called cane toad which eats the sugar cane beetles, and so they went and brought them from another country and introduced them to Australia to eat the cane beetles, and they did, and it worked brilliantly. And the problem was, because the natural predator of the cane toad was not brought over as well, it meant that cane toads have basically taken over, and people are actually encouraged to run them over now, because sometimes you see whole roads covered with them because they've taken over so much. So yes, advantages of biological control: no need for chemical pesticides. Once a predator is introduced, it can have an impact over many years. No need to repeat the treatment, and the pest can become resistant to the predator. Disadvantages: the pest is not eliminated, it only has its numbers reduced. The predator may not eat the pest. The predator may eat useful species. The predator's population may grow out of control, as I just mentioned with the cane toad, and the predator may move beyond the area in which it was introduced and become a nuisance. So again, this is an issue, so please be aware. 6-mark question here, very easily I can see this: intensive farming, organic farming, hydroponics and biological control. Can you state the advantages and disadvantages of each?